Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and here with Mike Simmons. On past episodes, we've talked about call planning. We've talked about account planning. This week, Mike is going to help us learn about territory planning. Mike, that's where we're going to take this. How do you put together a business plan for your territory?
Now, I think this is like any other prospecting activity that you have, any other research activity that you have, any other planning activity that you have. For me, it's about kind of beginning with the end in mind. It's going through and saying, and I know that goes back to Covey, but it's what am I ultimately trying to accomplish? What do I need this thing to look like at the end of next year? And as we move into the fourth quarter of 2017, most of us are starting to think about what does 2018 look like? So for me, territory planning, there's a couple of different factors that go in. One is, what's my role inside the organization? Who are the customers who historically have purchased? What is their customer type? So, can I create organization personas or organization profiles around my ideal customer? It gets into that who, the what, the why, the where, the when, the how about these organizations who I'd want to target. Most of us also know that it would take a lot of work to boil the ocean. But if I can compartmentalize that and shrink it down to a 5-quart pot, it's much easier to boil that. It takes significantly less energy to boil that. And there goes my lack of science. It may take the same amount of energy to boil that pot because of temperature and whatnot, but I know that I'm going to be able to solve that problem. I'm going to be able to solve the problem of heating up the water inside that pot to get to my objective, which is getting the water to boil. So I've hit on a couple of different points. So I'm going to bring that back and say, I usually start with a blank sheet of paper. And the blank sheet of paper will have kind of a yes-no question that'll let me kind of organize customers or organize a market. So let's say that the yes-no question is related to companies who are in the high-tech space. So am I targeting companies in the high-tech space? Yes. Is this company in the high-tech space? If no, they go on one side and they're not part of the territory that I'm going to target. Then the next piece is there a specific technology or is there a specific, let's get away from technology. Is there a specific market size, company size that I'd like to profile? And maybe that company size that I'm profiling are those with more than 2,000 software engineers inside the organization. So I take another line, I draw it halfway up the piece of paper, perpendicular to the first line, and I say greater than 2,000 software engineers, less than 2,000 software engineers. And I want to make sure that I'm focused on that upper right quadrant, which is companies who are in the technical space who have more than 2,000 software engineers. Then I start to go ahead and compartmentalize that a little bit further. Maybe it's by territory. Maybe I need to focus on a specific geography. Maybe I need to focus on an age of company. Maybe I need to focus on a total amount of revenue that they've generated. Whatever that next question is, it becomes another line that I run perpendicular to the second line I added in there. And we'll provide these visuals so that I know talking on a podcast that's all audio and describing visuals where we could use a whiteboard is kind of rough. So we'll share that. But now I've got another line. And basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to take this page from one giant page of customers that I'd be targeting to half, and then half of those, and then half of those again, and just compartmentalizing these down to a point where I've got a manageable group of targets that I'm going after. For me, historically, my focus has been on larger strategic sales. So this is in any given year, I would expect to close 2, maybe 3 deals over the course of a year. In order to close 2 to 3 deals over the course of the year, I'd have to have somewhere between 5 and 7 bona fide opportunities that I'm working on. So how can I work my way into the point where I've got those 5 to 7 bona fide opportunities? We've talked in the past, when you're managing a territory and you're managing an organization, you're part of an organization that's been around for a couple of years, you begin your following year planning. I like to begin that following year planning right around June of the given year. In this situation, let's just look at this as I'm new into an organization. So new into an organization, I've identified my market that I'm targeting, the profile of the customer. Now I've got my list of 10 target accounts that I'm looking at. On those 10 target accounts, I want to make sure I put together an account plan. And we've talked about the account plan in the past. And that account plan at the individual account level is that who, what, why, where, when, and how. And as I start to gather that information, the account plan, I will compare it to other companies that we've had success with, others inside the organization who've had success in building business in their individual territories. Because we know that if we've been able to deliver a solution into an organization that has similar things going on as these 10 accounts that you're targeting, now I'm going to be able to tell a little bit tighter story, or I have some ideas on what the story looks like that's going to apply into those organizations. So things that we've talked about so far: start big, compartmentalize, shrink down, become very targeted, and then work against that plan.
How much time does it take you to put this together? Because I imagine there's a lot of planning time involved. That now I do realize, though, it sets you up to have success and to know what you're doing. But I'm just curious, how much time do you put into putting this plan together?
Good question. It depends, like most things. I mean, the first time that you're doing it, this could be an all-day event where you've got a whiteboard in front of you, and I've got a whiteboard in my office, and I'll put some things up on the whiteboard, and I'll create some of those targets and some of that, and identify what do I want to do inside that general territory over the course of the next 30, 60, 90 days, 180 days. But the first time that you do it, I would allocate at least a day to uncover and create that ideal customer profile and start to put a couple of companies on the list that you're going to target. Then beyond that, I would want to revisit that at least an hour a week to validate, am I moving in the right direction? And it's tough to say, okay, on the surface, 1 hour out of however many hours you work doesn't sound like much, but I can tell you most of you will not do it that following week. And then the next week it's, hey, well, now I need to add 2 hours. And you can't, like sleep, you can't catch up on that stuff. You just it's got to be this constant cadence. So I would allocate an hour a week to revisit my territory plan, to identify what did I learn in the last week, or what did I learn over the course of the last couple of weeks that have informed me on ways that I want to adjust it.
Now, this may sound independent as its own thing, but I know that it ties together to the account plan and the call plan. Give us an idea of how all of these are tethered together.
Yeah. So the territory plan is my overall blueprint on how I'm going to operate the business for the year. And as sales professionals, we should look at ourselves as individual franchise owners. And we've got this franchise. That franchise is our territory. This is my business plan. These are the guideposts that I'm going to, or the spectrum that I'm going to try to work within as I go about executing my business. Then within those guideposts or that spectrum, I've got multiple account plans. Those account plans are the target accounts that I'm working on. And again, we're talking about in an environment where maybe I've got 10 target accounts where I'm expecting to close 2 to 3 deals in a given year. We can adjust this up or down depending on your individual business. And then within the account plans, there's flashlights. This is kind of that leadership vision thing that we've talked about too before. Now I've got the individual laser pointers, which are the call plan. And as I go through each of those call plans, when I compile all of my call plans together, build them into my account plan, I can tell a story about each of those clients. And then across all of the clients, I should be able to tell a story about how I'm operating my business. I should be able to provide an executive summary about what I do and where I do it and where it works and how it works and how I'm performing. And then if you want to go even a step further, you start to talk about what are the individual KPIs that I should be measuring myself against within that territory. You've got individual account KPIs, you've got a territory set of KPIs, and then you've got your overall organization or business KPIs.
This might be a softball question and answer. I get that, but I want to hear you talk about it. If our organization that we work sales for does not do territory plans, is it still a good idea to create one on my own?
Yeah, absolutely. Granted, I tend to be kind of the lone wolf. I'll go out and I'll do things on my own. I'm a bit introverted. If I'm in a high stress environment, I tend to isolate myself. I also like to learn by doing. Yeah. If you're inside an organization and territory planning is not something that is reinforced or even supported, I think you may want to take some time and figure out if it works for you and at least try it and start to say, okay, well, what is my business going to look like in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? Work backwards. How am I going to get there? So if this is what the business is going to look like at that point in time, and from a sales perspective, I'm generating X amount of revenue. I'm generating $2 million in annual recurring revenue. And currently my territory is a $500,000 territory. So I've got to grow that business by 300%. How am I going to get there? This is where territory planning comes in. And I'd be surprised if an organization doesn't adopt it, other than I know in some of the high transaction environments, the organizations will say, well, do I really need to do it? It seems like a lot of work. My viewpoint on this is that if you take the time and do the work, you will identify opportunities that are not obvious to others, and you'll create new ways to grow your business. So take the time, go through and do the territory planning, and know that it's more work up front. Then it can be adjusted. It can be moved into more of a maintenance mode. But the more you maintain it, the better it will be, and the more it will continue to apply to your business. I had some great guidance early on in my career. Run your sales territory like you would a franchise. It's your own business. Operate it like it's your own business. Now, you've got guidelines and guideposts that your organization will set. There's certain requirements that they'll have for you. Operate inside those guidelines, operate inside those guideposts, but operate from the perspective of internal ownership, or, Jocko Willink likes to talk about extreme ownership. Own this territory that you're building out.
What are some of the common mistakes you see people make in territory plans?
I think the biggest mistake that people make in territory plans is templatizing this thing and saying, okay, this is the territory plan that worked for the rep who's up in the Bay Area, and I'm out in Ohio. I'm going to go ahead and use the same territory plan. I'm going to go out and this is how I'm going to target those companies, and this is how I'm going to go about building out the business. This is very personal. So even though there's an organization structure that can be applied to territory planning and some concepts that can be applied to territory planning, and the document that we'll share is going to look like a template, you've got to personalize it. We talk about this often. Sales is a thinking process. Apply thought to what you're doing and adapt and adjust the plan to fit the needs of your customer base, your personal experience, and the things that you've learned. I think the other thing that people tend to make a mistake on is they do it once and then they don't do it again until someone says, hey, we're getting ready to kick off the year. Everybody list out your top 10 accounts and what you're planning on doing with them, and you deliver your business plan for the year. That's the time where you go through and you add in your bullet points to the slide deck and you go through the same motions that everybody else on the team is going through. If that's the time that you're thinking about territory planning, you're doing your territory a disservice, and you're doing your ultimate customer base a disservice, and you're missing many opportunities. So build it once, revisit it on an ongoing basis, always adjust and adapt it. Don't become so married to this plan that it's set in stone. Things change. Now, we've talked about technology a fair amount on the podcast. The iPad just celebrated its 10-year anniversary not that long ago. I mean, there are new technologies that are out there all the time. There are new buying processes. There are buyers, examples of how people are purchasing, different data sets that are available. Adjust and adapt to how these businesses are changing, how the technology is changing, and don't think that you can use the same territory plan that you used 5 years ago today. It doesn't necessarily apply. Many of those organizations are out of business. I mean, where's Whole Foods now? Whole Foods is in the process of being acquired by Amazon, or has been acquired by Amazon. How will that market evolve 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road? Think of that as you start to adopt and adapt your territory plans.
Okay, we hear what you're saying and think this is a great idea. And I know you gave us a little bit of insight on how to divide things up, but give us some final words. If we're inspired to get started on this, just give us some final words on what our next step should be.
So by the time this podcast goes live, we'll have some information up on the website about territory planning and our general approach. But for me, I like to start with a blank piece of paper. And I just like to start putting notes and ideas and observations down. And then I like to identify themes and clusters of information so that I can see the patterns start to show themselves. And then once I've identified those patterns, I want to see how do those patterns apply to this thing that I'm working on. If they apply, then they become part of the plan. They become part of this 30, 60, 90 set of objectives that I want to work on. You hear us talk on and on about 30, 60, 90. It's the Ben Franklin quote out there, fail to plan is a plan to fail. And then you go to the Customato quote, which is everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So you get this dichotomy that happens across each of those instances. Know that this plan is a living, breathing document, and it can only live and breathe if you continue to feed it. And you continue to feed it with new information. You continue to feed it with new insight. You continue to feed it by exposing it to others. You continue to feed it by gathering feedback. Don't look at planning your territory as a one-time event. Look at it as something that will evolve and will change over time. We've just gone through this process of planning with a company that one of our clients, and it's a niche product targeted at a specific segment of the market where there's a defined number of customers who would purchase it. So you think territory planning would be pretty easy. Well, it's still a challenge because as you go in and you start to engage in the conversations with people who are actually working in that environment, you realize that some organizations will call a role a different title, but it's the same role, it's just a different title. So that becomes another data point that gets factored into your territory plan. If you kept it just in the account plan, it'd be isolated and you'd always be targeting the VP of HR instead of the VP of people, as an example. So remember, this territory plan is the holistic point of view of all of the operating plans that are happening inside your territory. Those operating plans are your individual account plans. Inside those individual account plans, you have call plans to keep you on track. Those are just some things to kind of keep in mind as you go through this process, and know that it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be finished.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. If you want to find out more about a territory plan or call plan, these other things we've talked about, you can do so at catalystsale.com. Also, you will find all of the past episodes of the show there. So again, thank you, Mike, for teaching us about territory planning, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.